We're ready for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Hello. So, roll call.
Commissioner Parham,
Present.
Commissioner Winger,
Present.
Commissioner Zinda,
Present.
and Commissioner Mazzoni is absent tonight.
Do we have any non-agenda public comments from anyone today that would like to speak up? Looks like we don't. Any conflicts of interest?
Not from me.
Do you want to come forward and talk to us?
Yeah.
Is it? I thought we just had the,
We're not quite to that agenda.
if it's the fence that's just been built, we're not there yet.
Hang on.
Okay.
Keep that thought.
So now we're up to our regular agenda, and the first item is election of officers. And I would like to make a motion to postpone for a couple months until we're in a better position to vote officers in,
A couple of months or
or
maybe
next
should we?
month. That's fine.
Perhaps we shouldn't wait more than 1 month.
Okay, we'll postpone for 1 month. I make a motion to postpone for 1 month.
I second.
Anyone A or anyone approve?
All those in favor?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion is approved. So public hearings. At this point, the only thing up is a fence permit application for Patrick Riley. Do you have,
I have a staff report.
I bet you do.
Okay. Well, this is a part of the fence code that is just it's pretty straight-up use permit for when you exceed the height of a fence. We're not really here looking at the design or the, whatever, because I think that, the way it was handed to me is that the planning director felt that the only thing that we're worried about here, I think as you saw in the email from planning director and / city manager, was the fact that this fence was over 8 feet, and it is lattice. So, I guess what in a perfect world, it's a 6-foot height, but you can go to 8 feet with a use permit as long as it's like a lattice type of material. At least that's what I've gathered. So this isn't really a permit for the special, materials or any of the stuff that we talked about over the winter. Anyway, so basically it all boils down to fences or structures exceeding the allowable height to enclose tennis courts, similar areas, or unusual privacy requirements may be erected subject to obtaining a use permit. Therefore, and such use is found to not reduce public safety patrol and access capabilities. So again, we're trying to figure out whether this fence at 8 feet, where it is 8 feet, doesn't interfere with like looking at the property or any kind of public access. That's what we're looking at. Obviously, that's pretty easy to figure out, but I'm going to go on. So basically, we have a property that's sandwiched between two built properties. We have the regular old storefront looking stuff, then we have this vacant one with a setback. And along one wall is a series of windows and certain ideas from, I don't know what the use is there exactly, but it could be any, residential or commercial, it wouldn't matter, but this applicant feels that there's a privacy issue on that, and I'd have to think that, yes, having windows looking right down on a property could pose a privacy issue. I think there are some other requirements on this type of business that actually do require a good security system and fencing, and I think that is the idea of the front portion of the property. The only part that's like a new fence on the frontage, which, let me conclude. The side doesn't necessarily interfere with the way the property looks from the street whatsoever. If I was to comment on the actually aesthetics of the fence, I would say it's kind of a nice design, integrating rock and wood the way it is. And I think there is a theme going on there with some of the older kind of old style, equipment or whatever there that kind of adds to the ambience of the property, if you ask me. But again, we're not really here to worry about that. So the front of the property has a gate that you can see through. And at the end, very edge, there's a gap between the stone and the next building, and it's filled in with that wood lattice material, again, tying it in with the stone, and it goes up to 8 feet. There's pictures, photographic evidence in the staff report from the street that shows that it doesn't necessarily interfere at all with the access or the looking at the property. Now, the application does state a good there is some good information in the application packet provided by the applicant about the privacy issues that we described. I do believe that's a valid concern, having windows look down upon a courtyard, especially when the fencing isn't really even part of the public streetscape. It's really inside, and it's not visible. So essentially, to me, this one's kind of easy. Basically, this planning commission just has to make a finding that it doesn't interfere with the security or access to the property. And and that's basically also after establishing the fact that it does qualify as a security or privacy issue that needs this type of fence. To me, in a commercial area, there's a lot of reasons to have a fence that's sometimes above 6 feet. But in this case, I think there are some, there's a different level of security that it's a higher calling, for this type of business that is more to do with their licensing. That, the only thing is, I think that the awkward part is we constructed the fence already. Now, we're not here to punish the person for constructing the fence already. We're just here to get it back up and catch up with it so we can say that it's good. Now, if it was non-compliant and you guys didn't like the fence, well, then, of course, the fence has to come down. If it's acceptable to the Planning Commission and you are able to make the findings, I would say go ahead and do so. It is a project that's exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act. Specifically, I spelled out the section numbers there. It's an existing facility or small structure, I forgot which one, but it comes down to saying fence, an appurtenant fence on a property. So that's my staff report. You can have discussion, open the public hearing. That's my recommendation. So my recommendation is to adopt the notice of exemption and to discuss and be able to show the record that it's not a security issue. It doesn't interfere with looking at the property, and that you can approve the fence as it is. Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anyone have, any of my fellow commissioners have anything to say about this?
Well, I'd like to hear from the proponents and possible opponents of this, but the way we can have some meaningful discussion based on any additional input they may have
That
for
makes
us.
sense to me. Would anyone like to comment from the audience?
My name is Dave Burkeye, and 210 Main Street, the only comments I have on that is...
Could you speak into the microphone, please?
Is it on? Yeah, Dave Borkali, 210 Main Street, here in Weed. The only comments I have on that, I don't mind, the height doesn't bother me on that. It actually looks pretty good. The only thing is the way they do it. They know they need permits. And if they don't get the permits first, if one guy gets by with it, the rest are gonna get by with it. And if you don't enforce getting the permit and doing it right the first time, then you can have a bunch of junk going around. And that's what happened with the metal fencing. So I think you should find out, now, I don't know what he's gonna sell in there, but actually it looks pretty good. But you gotta go with code. And is that fence built to code?
I wouldn't know that, this is just the planning part.
I know,
mean,
yeah. But
The
fence is
building
up.
department would be the one to know that.
Uh-huh.
I think we'd have it, they are covered in the building code. So, but what we're doing here is kind of walking it back and getting the permit based on a fence that
Well,
already
that's the thing,
exists.
is
You know,
too
we
many-
almost got to pretend it's an application
A lot
instead
of
of,
times, too many things go up before getting the permit, and then they let it go,
I would agree.
and that's not very good.
Nope.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
I'm the applicant, should I present? Normally I present, or normally
You guys
the RV or...
got any questions for him?
If-
Come on down.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Commission. So first to address why we built before the permit. We actually, this was designed by Radcliffe Architects in San Francisco. The fence design itself, I took it from my own house in the Bay Area. So it's actually architecturally designed, that's why it looks nice, and thank you for the compliments on how it looks. I also think it looks nice. It's incredibly expensive to do it that way, horizontally instead of vertically. The reason why we chose to build was that it actually is allowed by the state. It's also allowed by Mount Shasta, and it's allowed by Dunsmuir, and it's allowed by Castella, and it's allowed by everywhere else in Siskiyou County. A 6-foot fence with a 2-foot lattice is consistent with the 2013 triennial edition of the building code. This in fact, actually is a 8-foot, actually it's not even an 8-foot lattice because we built into the rock that was pre-existing. So the metal and the rock been there for 20 years, apparently with what we can tell, done by an industrial artist, a local industrial artist named Lewis. So this is my form of apologizing that the city of Weed had a slight difference than Dunsmuir, Mount Shasta. Everything else is by right. I can build that fence, and in fact, I have built that same fence in my property in Mount Shasta and Dunsmuir. That same fence, and it's been okayed by Dave Smith because it is consistent with 2013 building code. So this is actually just unfortunately a slight difference between the cities, and I need to respect that. And so I have educated myself on the other differences between the two, or actually the 3 governing bodies. It is a plaza. Unfortunately, it seems to get more traffic than even the Heritage Plaza, just in terms of people coming in. And there's always beer cans, there's always beer things just everywhere around there. So we decided it was time to separate those 2 places. There's a walkway also that's just adjacent to my property. And so I think it's very easy, especially considering that the property was not vacant, but just not being used for so long. It was essentially an unused weed property in the front with the thing in the back, with the actual structure way in the back. The history of it was that there was a storefront, it burned down, and the only thing remaining was the back structure, which was the original kitchen. So yes, thank you for mentioning the privacy, that's one of our concerns, also mostly security. The state likes to have secure places that are selling cannabis. That is business, just to clarify. And in the future, I suspect there will be actually even additional security requirements, in which case I'll have to present again to make those changes, in which I fully intend to do so. But just to be clear, it was totally a mistake then. It wasn't we're gonna show them on Main Street. We knew everyone would see it. It wasn't to build without asking permission. We just thought it was consistent with everything else, all the other studies that they do say 6-foot limit, but you can do a 2-foot lattice on top of that. Well, mine just happens to be 8-foot lattice, so it totally qualifies. But still has to go through a cup then here. What else did I see? So that's pretty much it. I also checked the ratio to make sure that it was consistent when you have the definition of lattice. Unfortunately, there is no definition of lattice in the weed code that I could find, the municipal code. So something that also might need to be addressed, because if there's no definition of it, then we actually aren't saying that it's a fence. The Mount Shasta and Dunsmuir both have a definition for a lattice so that it actually can be explained, so someone that's building will know precisely what they can and can't build. But I believe that the fence is consistent with where we're going with the design of the place. Inside, it also matches. We're trying to do a pretty good job, actually, in terms of architecture. You're going to really like when we present the building in the front. And then it'll really match. It'll really make sense. But I felt it was a salient design for its use, the fact that people can still see through, but that there's still some form of not only privacy, but mostly security. And with that, I think I'll let other people present.
Can we ask you some questions?
Absolutely. That's what I'm here for.
Yeah. I hope you'll start being open more. We haven't seen the business open much, so that'll be nice when you get going. But when the business is closed, is the front gate locked or open?
When the business is closed, the front gate is locked.
Locked, okay, to keep people from wandering through.
That's correct.
Okay. That was one of the questions I had. And then the door on the side can be locked also when the business is closed?
Yes, it has its own key. It's basically for employees to get in.
Gotcha.
That is essentially, it could be open for businesses, or for business during business hours as well. It's essentially the only way that an employee, if you think about it, could get in through the front as opposed to going all the way back.
Right.
And we felt in fire reasons and other things, there should be also a door on the side.
Okay.
An operable door.
Okay.
To address your first comment about it being opened or closed, we hire local people. The 2 employees that we have now have finals. And so I basically allowed it to be down while we've been working that out.
Gotcha.
And I think their finals are this week. So that's
think
it.
so.
Yeah, they're COS students,
Okay.
Nursing students. So
Okay.
it's very appropriate in terms of their studies and other things that they could focus on that, and they'll be full-time
That makes sense.
during the exciting summer. This will be an exciting summer, I think.
Okay, wonderful.
Just so you know, that rock wall is about 8 years old.
Oh, okay.
I know because I contributed some of the artifacts embedded in it and.
I thought so, yeah.
And was around for the building party.
I got Lewis right, though, right?
Yes.
Thank you.
Lewis
I was trying to put that on the
It was
record,
built
that
by
the original
Tony.
artist was
I could give you
Lewis.
his last name if you want to know who built it.
I've tried to reach out and contact him to ask if he thought that would be a good, Lewis himself, but I would love to have that information. Yes, the last
Okay,
name.
I'll look up his last name. I can't remember his last name. He's in Oregon right now.
Greatly.
But I like the look of the fence. Donna and I were both quite concerned a while back when we saw it built because we had not seen anything come before the Planning Commission. So now I understand why that happened, and I do appreciate your commenting on our lack of definition of lattice work, because I wasn't aware of that. And I think that's something we can tighten up in our own regulations, so I appreciate that heads up. I also really understand the need for security on this building. I was hired by the previous owners to clean that lot up once a year. And you're lucky I at least did that, because it was quite a thoroughfare and a dog park, and it was nasty. So it's good that it's secure, because people are so used to just taking a shortcut through there and walking their dogs through there and apparently partying in there. So the 8-foot fence makes perfect sense to me. I really, really appreciate that you have saved the things that Lewis built into that, because they really add character to it.
Absolutely. It reminds me actually of a place in New Zealand that has skunk works. It's essentially industrial art mixed with whatever the local rock is. In this case, it's local lava rock, which makes sense. So it is actually a derivative of industrial art that's being done actually as a movement all across, for the last 10 years, a movement that's been going all across the world. And it's great that we have a little bit of it, that kind of, because the amount of work that it sounds like you personally know that, but the amount of work that goes into something like that can't even be measured. And so there was no doubt we were going to not only save it, but I believe, enhanced it a little bit, because it actually pops a little bit now. The juxtaposition between the wood and the rock now shows the rock more, because it's your darker contrasts. I would also, just for the record, I wanted to offer you the Mount Shasta, not to say that you're going to do everything that Mount Shasta does, but Mount Shasta has on 1820-05, decorative lattice may be used for privacy atop the 6-foot fence, not to exceed 8 feet in total height. So that's how they call it out, and that's done, sealed done. And that's the code, that's their citing, just to save if you wanted to see, where our basis was.
But could you really define this as decorative lattice? It's not.
I don't think
Yep.
so.
Is it?
I think this is just part of the fence. It just
It's a
happens to be
fence.
made of the stuff that lattice is made of. It's a really nice fence. I wouldn't call this lattice work.
Yeah, that's, I wasn't even,
And then-
but technically,
But
maybe it is
let's
lattice.
remember, all we're really worried about here is whether
Yep.
you could see into the lot, if its security
Right.
is impacted, or if it impacts some access. So we're not really worried about the qualitative
Right.
parts of the space. It's a beautiful fence. We all can agree on that. And also, it doesn't matter what other cities say.
Yep.
I happened to be the planner for the city of Mount Shasta from 2001 to 2013, and I know that there's a 6-foot limit on fences, and to get a lattice done, it is on the books as a conditional use. They might have changed it in the last 2 years or so. But what we have, when we have the building code and all that, that's, the code, the government code enables the cities to make up their own ordinance. So what's good for Mount Shasta isn't always good for Weed. And in this case, it's the same thing. So the 6-foot limit, if you want to go the 2 extra feet with lattice or whatever, you still have to come before this board. But ours is different, and then it doesn't really say lattice. It just says if you want an 8-foot fence, and and you can determine that it's for privacy reasons, then you could get this through this use permit. Now, we've determined that the privacy is an issue there, thank you, and also that we've determined that we can still see inside the thing. That's really what this is about. So it's also exempt from CEQA, always important to me.
Well, that's what we were aware of, was the
Yeah.
8-foot
Right.
limitation and not the specifics of lattice or whatever. So, I'm glad to see you here. So we can
Yeah, it's not a
tighten
big
this
deal
up.
to get walked back and get a permit, as long as the fence is kind of compliant. That's kind of my theory. If it would have been something that we probably wouldn't approved, well, that would have been a different story. And then we would be talking about, well, what are you going to do to remove it? But we're not. So I think that's a great fence.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And the ratio does, the only reason I brought up the CBC is that the ratio is defined there. It's not defined typically in the local ordinances. The local ordinance, as you know, Mount Shasta has it or how Dunsmere has it, is just decorative lattice. And they explain lattice, but they don't offer a ratio. And then you have to go to the California Building Code to see the actual ratios, well, what makes a lattice? And it's actually defined there, and so we use that. That's the only reason I brought it up in terms of that. So it is by at least the state of California considered lattice, and architects would consider it lattice.
We're just considering the height of the
Yeah,
fence.
I know,
Whether
I know,
you're
I know. It's,
We're
It's a
simple,
lot simpler than that.
we're simple
know.
folk.
Well, I really
I'm-
don't have any questions myself. I do appreciate the thorough explanations. And I can certainly understand, because of the nature of your business and the requirement from the state of California for the security, the urgency in building that to provide that for your customers as well as your product. I greatly appreciate it. Beauty is subjective, and it's in the eye of the beholder. And I'm not here to advocate personal tastes. I personally like the fence myself. But what I will say to that effect is that I very much appreciate the fact that you took an architectural design review of this and that you put that much thought into the existing components, as well as, you know, you addressed the security issues for the state. I'm sure that helps the city. You did the proper architecture work on this, and it's bringing value to our city, to your storefront, as well as to the city's main street. And the value added in the security is greatly appreciated. We need a lot more entrepreneurs who are thoughtful, not just of themselves, but of the community. And so thank you for that.
thank you, Joe.
Here, here.
Yay. Good point.
Thank you, Patrick.
I'd just like
Okay,
to say
so-
one last thing too. I think we actually have met. I think you might have been the one that actually covered the window too, that was
Yes.
broken. So thank you for that, because who knows what kind of damage would have been done to other things of that. Inside Lewis did a lot of work inside too. And it kind of makes me sad that he didn't get to see what could have been. We tried to kind of follow his vision on like skylights and everything else. In terms of like, you know, inside just the improvements, the aesthetics. But I have no idea what it would have been like had there been more damage than just a broken window prior to my ownership, which sounds like you did on your own time, boarded it up, and
I was
yeah.
amazed that just a brick could go through the double-paned window
Yeah.
with a brick-shaped hole. That was it.
Can I just have one brief reminder of what a suggested motion might be? We must include the notice of exemption there, so we want to move to adopt the notice of exemption, and that you approve the fence with the findings in the staff report, or, you know,
And you wrote it down for us, thank you.
yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are we ready? You
Yeah.
want to make a motion?
I move to adopt the notice of exemption and approve the fence permit at the address we're discussing.
I'll second that motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, that's it. Nice
The
fence.
motion is approved. All right. At this point, we need to have approval of the minutes for last week,
Last month? Last month.
last month. Do we have a motion to approve last month's?
I don't believe we're required to make a motion.
I
Is
think if we're
No formal
happy
motion,
with
okay.
them, we just go with it.
All right. Do we have any commissioners' reports?
I just want to say, in speaking of Main Street and what Patrick's done to improve its appearance, in front of the building that is vacant, there's a big pile of dirty clothes there. The sidewalks are horrible. To whom do we complain when there's just really a disgusting mess in front of one of the vacant buildings.
Boy, I don't know that. You're at City Hall more than I am. What's that?
Probably the landlord.
Well, the landlord won't
Do
work.
they have a written complaint form in our city that gets acted upon if you feel went out?
I think it depends on
Okay,
what the complaint is, which department would handle it.
okay.
So would that be Public Works? Would that be, because legally, actually, it's the landlord's responsibility, but when there is a landlord that possibly is not even in the country, it's a little bit hard to get him to clean up his property or his sidewalk.
Where is this?
It's, I don't know what it's called. It's the one that we cleaned up.
The one that
before-
we
yeah,
pressure washed.
We
the,
pressure washed.
It's the one just south of.
Where the old,
Just south
where the
of-
old thrift shop
just
used to
south
be.
of
Okay.
Patrick.
It's the one that
Watch
owns
it.
the walkway next to this building.
Oh, that Archie thing there?
Yeah,
Oh,
it's,
wow.
it belongs
Okay.
to that building next to it.
There's just a
gotcha.
pile of, there's just a
Bummer.
pile of clothes on top of the dirt. And how embarrassing for our city to have somebody walk down Main Street and, as you know, you deal with it.
We cleaned it up a few times. That walkway is always, and, yeah,
Well,
it's gotta be something that whereas understands that if he keeps, or if there's no maintenance on it, there will be a lien or something.
well,
There was a discussion.
I'm not discussing, I mean, where the clothes are right now is actually on Main Street in front of that. But yes, it's that alleyway's always awful, but just to have,
There was a discussion at last week's council meeting to put together some volunteers for community cleanup and beautification, so.
we're tired of doing that as a person who has done years of that, actually literally sweeping and cleaning and pulling weeds. That's sad. We have a vacant property registration ordinance that should be dinging these people. And I see no beef in the vacant property registration ordinance. Why have an ordinance if it is not? And people are allowed to get by year after year. Sorry, I'm getting off of my soapbox now.
There has to be some recourse when someone's neglecting their property so much, especially on Main Street.
We have an ordinance, and it's supposed to be kept up, and if it's not kept up, it will eventually have a lien on it, and, you know, but it appears to not be being enforced. I also brought to attention that above the Black Butte, there's a piece of siding up above that is dangling, and it's going to fall on somebody's head. And I haven't received a response. So, do you have a report, Keith?
I have nothing tonight, just what I brought. So, thank you.
If nobody else has any comments, I think that means we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, I get to use this.
Oh.